Good morning, folks. As I let the shop warm up, because we have officially turned into winter. We have the white stuff on the ground. I thought I'd preface you on what today's adventure is going to be all about, and maybe fill you in on a handful of things that I've been working on behind the scenes that I haven't really done any videos on. First and foremost, we're going to be installing a catch can system on my 92 coupe. Now, the reason for doing this is, with the addition of the Kenny Bell, we are going to be throwing a heck of a lot more air and fuel down the throat of this small block Ford, and we need a way to efficiently deal with it. So the basics behind a catch can system are, you've typically just got one line in, one line out. The line in accepts crankcase gases from, say, your PCV system, brings them into the top of the can. There's a medium that sort of catches everything. Oil settles out into the bottom. You've got to drain off the bottom to get rid of any of that filthy oil. And then out of your exit, you run that back into your intake. And then you're running like anywhere from 90 to 95% clean air back into your intake system. So it keeps your intake pipes clean, your throttle blades clean, and all that good stuff. This is kind of a way of re-engineering what Ford intended to with just their basic PCV system. Now, the good folks at Elite Engineering have taken this a step further. Okay, that's their logo there. They have manufactured a system so that we can evacuate crankcase gases under all scenarios. So in the standard example I just gave, these catch can systems really only work efficiently under idle to like low load situations. But nobody likes driving their car around at idle and low load scenarios. We want to be worried about heavy throttle, wide open throttle scenarios as well. Well, that's where this fancy little guy comes into the mix. So this is just a CNC'd piece of aluminum. They've created this Venturi tube that you need to install in your intake pipe. Now, I'm just using this piece of intake pipe as a scrap mock-up because I'm building my own cold air intake system. But what ends up happening here is you run this in your intake system, and as air passes by here, you get a Venturi effect on the back side of this little tube. And then you run this tube over to the other exit port of your catch can system. So now we are catching crankcase gases in a circular manner, whether we are in low throttle idle scenarios or under heavier throttle, wide open throttle scenarios. We're going to be clearing this whole system out. Now, there is a third component to all of this, which is this guy, what they call their clean side separator. This is going to take place of our oil cap, and we're going to run a line off of here. And this is essentially emulating this guy right here, okay? That goes from your oil filler neck and up into your back into your throttle body there. That's what this is doing, except inside of here, it's like a little mini catch can. There's a medium in there, and it's going to catch any of the junk. It's essentially going to do exactly the same thing that this catch can system does. And then in order to make this all work even better, we've got one-way check valves, so we're not backfeeding anything, and everything works in the circular manner that it's intended to. In saying all that, this is one of those problems or installs where I had to like bust out the pen and paper and lay this all out. So I'm doing it in, well, the most efficient way possible. And I'm not just running a rat's nest of lines and hoses and what have you everywhere. I also obviously need to find a place to mount my catch can, so on and so forth. So that's kind of the bare bones behind all this. I will put some links down in the video to some write-ups that other gentlemen have done on systems like this, and they maybe could explain it a little bit better if I didn't do the best job explaining that to you, but there's kind of where we're at. Now, as far as what I've been up to since the last time I seen you guys. Okay, here we are. Now, I know a lot of you guys love giving me a hard time about why this Kenny Bell's not on the motor, but I'm hoping that based on my explanations, I can shed some light on why it's taken so long to put this thing on. It only makes sense to work my way up from the bottom to the top, and the top being the Kenny Bell being kind of that last step. Because of this catch can system, the Vintage Air AC system, which more on that later because you probably noticed there's not a compressor in there yet. The whole mocking up of this cold air intake system, so on and so forth. I just want to make sure that I'm not having to put things on, take them off, or curse myself for putting them on too early and then not having any real estate to work with. So here's where we're at. Injectors are now in. I've gone through and re-loomed and tidied, and so I kind of running this, braided stuff now instead of that old corrugated, goofy wire looming. I have ran my AC lines, which I'll maybe show you a little bit better view of this later, but I've ran them along my shock tower and kind of made them so that any rub areas looked after, and made them nice and clean, and brought them along the passenger side here, and obviously kept them away from my exhaust headers. Okay, the Vintage Air AC compressor, I was actually missing the port off of the compressor that accepts these two lines. I just got it in the mail yesterday, but I also need to do some finagling with all this bracketry because the Kenny Bell essentially runs right through here. And part of Kenny Bell's instructions tells you got to cut this top ear off. You kind of mill some of this down off the OEM bracket. But that all changes the way that the Vintage Air AC compressor works, because they also have, this is that port I just got yesterday, but they've got the addition of their own bracket and these spacers in order to run their little mini AC compressor that is different than the OEM compressor. You can see I've got an old one sitting here that I was just like farting around with. And then Kenny Bell also has a bracket. So there's a lot of brackets coming into play all at the same time. And I'm taking some heat from my good buddy Chris, the Infamous Project, because he wants to see me try and mount this AC compressor down here where the smog pump used to be, which I love the idea. I'm just, whatever. My little hard drive brain can only handle so much. So I might see what it looks like in there, but I got enough moving parts with what I'm dealing with right now. I don't know if I need to add a whole nother project in the mix. I think that kind of looks after everything under the hood. Now, in the cab, we've got the interior back in. And got my boost gauge / meth controller all wired up, and in the Tech Motion 3D printed gauge pod, got my air ride gauges wired back up. These were all a bit of a gong show to put in here because, well, you're dealing with wires and stuff behind the dash, and they're tricky to get in there. But they're now in, and kind of get a final look at the new Vintage Air AC HVAC controls, which are growing on me for sure. They look pretty neat lit up. The whole back of the dial lights up. And let me tell you, this fan moves air. Like, I'm telling you that this thing will part your hair if you're sitting in the back seat when those vents are on full blast. It's crazy. The Spall fan that Vintage Air has in their heater box is impressive. So that's really cool. And another neat little deal too is you can actually run AC in any vent configuration you want, which is different from the OEM controls, right? You can have this cranked over to AC, run it on the floor, run it on vent, run it on just defrost, whatever you want. So I kind of like that added feature as well. But anyway, and I guess why the kick panel and sill plate's still off is I just put my computer back in with the bass tune that Matthew Puzzi gave me, and I thought, well, this thing's going to go to him and get a full-blown dyno tune when it's all done, so no sense of putting those pieces back on. And finally, I mentioned a couple of videos ago that the rad that came out of my car just did not want to fit back in it with the addition of those Vintage Air AC lines. So I went and got myself a Mishimoto rad. I've mounted my Contour fans to it. Got my trunk sealant, my repurposed trunk sealer in there to seal my contour fans up against this Mishimoto rad. I'll give you a link to that video if you're interested in checking it out. And then finally mounted my coolant overflow bottle to the contour fans. What else here? Oh, I got some new rad hoses. I've done my poor man's braided hose look to these new rad hoses. I've got videos on that on the channel too, folks. Check those out if you have a need. And about the only situation that I think might not officially come into this video, because I do have to do some more finagling with this whole cold air system that I'm building. This thing, I mean, yeah, it doesn't seem like it's all that difficult, but getting it through my fender well so I don't have to like bore great big 4-inch holes into my fender well and stuff has proven to be somewhat challenging. So anyway, as far as this catch can system goes, the only thing that I believe might be left out here is actually mounting that Venturi tube, because this whole system is a little too long right now. Like my throttle body is going to be about here, and I don't want to start cutting these pipes and have them be too short or whatever, right? I want to just do that once. So we might leave that Venturi tube scenario out of here, because it is going to live in this tube on the bottom side, but I don't know how much of this pipe I'm going to have to cut off, if any, or if I can just get away with cutting this one off. Anyway. Okay, give you guys a look at what's going on underneath here. So, how I've mounted this catch can is I've actually utilized the old charcoal canister hole. Well, one of the holes. So for those of you that are unaware, so here's the charcoal canister and the bracket that comes from the factory. All right, so you can see it's missing a bolt there. Well, that bolt's now being used for my catch can. All right, so just give you a quick look from the back side here as to what's going on. I'm using all the hardware that's been supplied by Elite Engineering to mount it with, and I think this will be quite favorable when it comes to, you know, the location for draining and stuff, right? Throw the pan here and boom, done. Now, clearance of the rad, right? I don't have a smog pump in here, so I don't have to worry about any of that stuff. And my lines. So this is kind of where it gets tricky to explain, and I might show you guys on my piece of paper to make a little bit more sense of this. But if you remember from when we had this on the bench, the one tall line here, so this is my in, okay? This is where we're taking crankcase gases into the catch can. That goes up to my PVC on the back of my lower intake, all right? And then this guy, this is an exit. This one is going to go over to the, well, essentially the vacuum side of my intake. I'll explain this kind of conglomerate of things later on, but so it's going to come in here, and that will be, you know, like I said earlier, 90 to 95% clean air coming out of this catch can after it's kind of gone through the process that goes on inside of here, recycled air, back up and into the inlet. The other exit side, that's this guy right here that you can kind of see hanging out up on the inner apron there. That is going to go to that Venturi side of my intake pipe. Okay, here. So that's going to be our wide open throttle evacuation of crankcase gases. And the other one that's going over to the manifold vacuum side of the inlet on my blower, this guy is going to be doing his work under idle and low throttle scenarios. So as far as routing my lines go, I've ran, so the top one here is PCV in, and the bottom one here is that manifold one. I've ran them down and along in between the motor mount and oil pan. Kind of got fancy here off the dust shield of my T5 and just used an eyelet here to try to keep everything kind of cocked over and away from exhaust, anything hot. And then I just kind of shot them up and along my bell housing here. Nothing's officially routed yet, but that's kind of the area they're going to live in, okay? Just to give you a sense of, for anyone that's worried about those things hanging a little too low. So they're up above my headers anyway. The headers are gonna take the beating before my lines do. Okay, here's where all the magic happens and where all roads collide. So here's just a quick top look of the catch can and how it's mounted. Oh, right, and I mentioned to you guys earlier about my AC lines. So you can see here I've kind of ran them in and along and put them in. I've got like one-way Christmas tree clips that I factored into some heat shrink tubing and just utilized some of the holes in the shock tower there. So those are my two AC lines. One goes into the AC evap and the other one carries along and comes over to here. So anyway, that's that about that. Now catch can stuff. So I mentioned about the clean side separator. All right. So this is taking place of that OEM hose that goes from here, okay, on your oil filler neck up to your throttle body. This is going to do, well, pretty much the same thing, except it's going to go to that brass tree on my Kenny Bell inlet, okay? So there's my first loop that's going to go from valve cover back into the intake. Now, the next one here, this is going on that Venturi tube, okay? So this is one of my exits from my catch can. So that's going to come up and plug in kind of down in here somewhere. And then the other exit out of that catch can is here. Like I said, this is where all roads collide. This one's going to come up and also plug in right beside this one at the Kenny Bell inlet. And then obviously the PCV is what it is, right? Can't really see it in there, but off the back of the intake, trust me, it's in there. So, and that's what goes into that center section of my catch can. That's my in, the other two are my outs. And yeah, so to give you a little bit more of a bird's eye view of what's going on here. So PCV down to my center of my catch can, that's my in. And then I got my out going to my brass tree on my Kenny Bell, which I'll show you in one moment. And then my other out going into that Venturi side of my cold air intake. Okay, and finally, this explains kind of where I'm going with this whole brass tree system. Bear with me, I'll try to make sense of it all. So one of these is going to be for that clean side separator. That's the new valve cover oil fill cap, that little mini kind of catch can system. And the other one is from one of the exits on my catch can system. Okay. And then here up top, this is going to be like my main vacuum feed over to the vacuum tree right here. And that's going to control brake booster and cruise and all that good stuff. And then the center hole, fear not, we're going to be using that. That's going to take one of my meth nozzles and we're going to spray meth on the top side of the rotors. Or backside of the rotors, I should say. And then I still got to get vacuum over to my boost bypass. So anyway, hopefully you guys don't think I'm crazy anymore, and now you kind of see where a lot of this thinking can get cross-threaded and confusing. But that right there, ladies and gents, is how I'm running my catch can system. Okay, lots of info there, and I'm sure some of your heads are spinning. I know mine has been as I'm trying to figure this all out. One thing I kind of forgot to mention, you might have seen some of those labels that I had in there. Folks, this little label maker, I got it on Amazon. What an absolute lifesaver, especially when you're doing something like this where you got like 3, 4, 5 projects all on the go at once and all of them are colliding at once and you're like, what did that line go to again? Or where did that wire go? I know I had good intentions. Label maker. I'll give you a link down in the description for it. So yeah, and it just hooks up to your phone. One of the slickest things, instantly prints. Like it's so fast, it's wild. It's quicker than writing. Anyway, hopefully that explains a little bit about how I'm running my catch can system. Maybe gives you guys some ideas as to how you might want to run yours. I did a lot of homework on this and I think it's probably the best all-encompassing system that other people have come up with and I just kind of warmed up to the whole idea of. But anyway, I hope it helps. If it did, please share it along. That's why I do these videos, to try and give back to the community. So thanks for tagging along, guys. I appreciate it. Oh, and next steps. Okay, once I'm done with you guys, that vintage air compressor is getting figured out. And after that, believe it or not, it's Kenny Bell time. Trust me when I say I'm way more excited than you guys are. So thanks for tagging along, guys. Appreciate each and every one of you. I'll catch you on the next one. Take care. Bye for now.